Every time you order food, check the weather, or book a ride on your phone, there's this hidden engine humming along in the background, powering pretty much our entire digital world. But what you might not realize is that these invisible lifelines, they've become the main battlefield in a whole new kind of war. And the stakes, well, they couldn't be higher.
Just get a load of this number. Security researchers have seen a 400% jump in attacks that target these exact digital pathways. And listen, this isn't just some abstract technical problem for Silicon Valley. It's a threat that's growing like crazy, and it's aimed right at our data, our privacy, and the services we count on every single day. To really wrap your head around what's going on, let me paint a picture for you. Imagine you're at a restaurant, right? You give your order to a waiter who zips off to the kitchen and brings back your food. Super simple. But what if that waiter could be tricked? What if someone else in the restaurant could just ask the waiter for your order details, or even worse, your personal info, and the waiter just hands it over? That's exactly what's happening online, all the time.
So, that digital waiter we've been talking about, well, it has a technical name, and it is absolutely the key to understanding this whole invisible war.
Yep, that digital waiter is called an API, which stands for Application Programming Interface. It's basically a messenger that lets different apps talk to each other. So when your weather app shows you the forecast, it's using an API to ask a big meteorology service for that data. APIs are the glue, the connective tissue holding the modern internet together, passing literally billions of messages back and forth every second.
For years, cybersecurity was all about building these huge digital fortresses with giant walls. But as companies started opening up their data through APIs to make their apps work together, they accidentally created a brand new, much more vulnerable backdoor for attackers to sneak through.
And you better believe the bad guys noticed. Why bother trying to smash down the front gate of a fortress when you can just sweet-talk the waiter into handing you the keys to the vault? It's no surprise that APIs have now become the #1 target. They're a direct pipeline to the most sensitive data that companies have. And look, this shift didn't exactly come as a shock to the experts. The big research firm Gartner called this years ago. They were totally on the money. What used to be a rare problem is now the main way attackers are getting in. And frankly, it's catching a lot of companies completely flat-footed.
So how do we even begin to understand these new threats? Thankfully, we have a guidebook. A nonprofit called the OWASP Foundation, which focuses on software security, publishes this awesome list of the top 10 most critical API security risks. It's pretty much the definitive map of the hacker's new playground. Now, we're not going to drag you through all 10, don't worry. But just to show you how serious and honestly how simple some of these attacks are, let's just zoom in on 3 of the most devastating flaws from that OWASP list.
First up is the heavyweight champion, the most common API threat of them all, Broken Object Level Authorization, or BOLA for short. This is like telling the waiter, hey, I'd like to see my bill, ID number 123. But the waiter is so busy, they never actually check to see if you are customer 123. An attacker can just walk up and ask for bill 124, and the system, without thinking, just hands it right over.
And here's just how easy it can be. Look on the left. A normal user asks for their file, document 123. They get it. Simple. Now look on the right. An attacker makes the exact same request, but just changes the ID to 124. If that API is vulnerable, boom, it serves up someone else's private document without a second thought. It's that easy. And don't for a second think this is just some textbook theory. A security researcher found a flaw at Verizon. Yeah, that Verizon, where they could pull up another customer's entire contract just by tweaking a number in the web address. That is a classic BOLA attack, and it could have exposed a massive database of incredibly sensitive information. Okay, the second huge flaw is broken authentication. This is all about when the API just doesn't do a good enough job of checking who you are. It's like a restaurant that lets literally anyone just wander into the kitchen and say, hey, I'm a chef now. Attackers can use stolen passwords or access tokens to just pretend to be a real user and walk right in the door. And the fallout from this can be absolutely catastrophic. Remember after the US Capitol riot back in 2021? Researchers discovered that the social media site Parler had some APIs that required no authentication at all. The front door was just left wide open. This allowed people to scrape 70 terabytes of user data, posts, private photos, videos, you name it.
All right, our third flaw is a bit more subtle, but trust me, it's just as dangerous. It's called Broken Object Property Level Authorization, or BOPLA. This happens when an API lets you change a tiny part of your data that you should never be able to touch. The classic example? changing your user role from, say, customer to administrator.
So here's what that looks like in the wild. On the left, a perfectly normal request to create a new user. But on the right, a clever attacker realizes they can just sneak in one extra line of code. Add is admin true. A vulnerable API will just blindly accept this, and just like that, create a brand new user with full-on administrative privileges. Game over.
A real-world example of this kind of thing happened at Twitter. They had a flaw in their API where if you just gave it a phone number, the API would happily tell you which Twitter account it belonged to. This exposed private info and completely shattered the trust users had put in the platform to keep their data safe. Okay, so that's all pretty scary stuff. The big question is, how do we fight back? Well, the good news is the solutions aren't some big mystery. It's all about building security into these APIs from the ground up, right from the very beginning.
It really comes down to 4 key pillars. First, strong authentication. You have to be absolutely sure users are who they say they are. Second, you need granular access control. This is what solves that BOLA problem, by checking every single request to make sure a user is actually allowed to see that one specific piece of data. Third, you've got to validate everything, filter all the data coming from users so no malicious stuff gets through. And finally, you have to log and monitor everything, all the time, so you can spot attacks as they're happening.
So let's bring all this back home, because this invisible war we've been talking about, it has very real, very tangible consequences for all of us. At the end of the day, securing these digital waiters isn't just a job for the techies anymore. It's about trust, plain and simple. If we can't trust the apps we use every day to protect our data, the whole digital economy starts to wobble. For companies now, getting this right is a matter of survival. So the next time you tap open an app on your phone, just take a second to think about those invisible messengers working tirelessly behind the scenes. They are holding your data, your privacy, and your trust in their hands. And the one question we all need to be asking is, who's making sure all the doors are locked?